The old grandfather clock stood in the corner of my workshop, its silence more profound than any ticking it might have produced. It arrived yesterday, purchased by my wife Barbara, at an estate sale she'd insisted on visiting. "It'll be perfect for the foyer, Arthur," she'd said, her eyes bright with the thrill of the find. "It just needs your touch." My touch. For 30 years, I'd given my touch to timepieces, coaxing life back into gears and springs, polishing away the tarnish of decades. Clocks were my sanctuary. Predictable, mechanical, their secrets confined to the intricate dance of their inner workings, or so I thought. This one was a beautiful piece, late 19th century, walnut casing darkened with age, the moon phase dial painted with a care rarely seen anymore. Barbara had an eye for quality. I'd always give her that. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool wood, checking for warping, listening for the telltale clicks of loose joinery. Routine, familiar, grounding. My workshop smelled of lemon oil, old wood, and the faint metallic tang of brass cleaner, scents that usually calmed my soul. As I examined the base, feeling for hidden drawers or compartments common in clocks of this era, my fingers brushed against a slight unevenness in the back panel. Curious, I pressed gently. A faint click echoed in the quiet room, and a small section of the panel, no bigger than my hand, popped inward slightly. My heart gave an unexpected lurch. Hidden compartments weren't unusual, often used for storing winding keys or small valuables. But something felt different this time, a prickle of unease I couldn't name. Using a thin palette knife, I carefully eased the panel open. Inside, nestled against the dark wood, was not a key or a forgotten coin, but a small bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were old, the paper brittle and yellowed, but the ribbon looked newer, cleaner. My breath caught. These weren't period artifacts left by a previous owner. The handwriting on the top envelope, partially visible, was unmistakably Barbara's looping, elegant script, and the name written beneath the address wasn't mine. My workshop, usually a place of quiet concentration, suddenly felt airless. The scent of lemon oil turned cloying, the silence heavy. Pressing in on me, I lifted the small bundle, my hands trembling slightly, a tremor that had nothing to do with the delicate state of the paper. Why would Barbara hide letters? These letters, addressed to someone else? Inside a clock she'd just bought? Why not in her desk or a dresser drawer? Why here, in my space, tucked away in a secret compartment of an object meant for my attention, my restoration? The name wasn't one I recognized immediately. Michael, just Michael. No last name visible. The address was local, though. A knot formed in my stomach, cold and tight. I hadn't opened them yet, hadn't read a word beyond that name, but a certainty, chilling and absolute, began to crystallize in my mind. These weren't old letters she'd forgotten about. The ribbon, the deliberate hiding place, it felt recent, intentional. I sank onto my workbench stool, the bundle heavy in my palm. The clock stood impassive, its ornate hands frozen, marking a time that suddenly felt irrelevant. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, dust motes dancing in the beams. My world, so meticulously ordered, so carefully maintained, felt like it was tilting on its axis. Barbara, my Barbara, the woman I'd shared my life with for nearly 4 decades, the anchor of my quiet existence. What secrets did she hold? What life existed within her that I knew nothing about. The clock's silence seemed to deepen, mirroring the sudden, terrifying void that had opened within me. I looked from the letters to the clock, then back again. It needed my touch, she'd said. But I had the sickening feeling that touching this might break everything. My fingers, usually so steady when handling delicate clock mechanisms, felt clumsy, thick. I traced the loops of Barbara's handwriting on the top envelope, the familiar curves now seeming alien, deceptive. Michael. The name echoed in the quiet. I racked my brain. Had she ever mentioned a Michael, a colleague, a distant cousin? No, nothing came to mind. Certainly not someone who warranted secret letters tied with ribbon and hidden in the guts of an antique. How long had they been there? The clock was new to the house, but the letters, were they old secrets she'd carried, seeking a new hiding place, or was this something current? The ribbon felt soft, relatively new, not brittle with age like the paper it bound. That detail snagged in my mind, a tiny gear catching where it shouldn't. It suggested recent handling, recent concealment. I thought of Barbara upstairs, perhaps reading in the sunroom or preparing dinner, humming softly as she often did. The image felt fractured now, like a reflection in disturbed water. 40 years. We'd built a life, navigated the currents of raising children, celebrating milestones, weathering losses. There had been comfortable silences, shared jokes, the easy rhythm of long companionship. Had it all been a facade? Was there a whole other narrative running beneath the surface, a story where I played only a peripheral role? The cold knot in my stomach tightened into a physical ache. My breath was shallow, my chest tight. I felt a ridiculous urge to put the letters back, slide the panel closed, and pretend I'd never found them. To return to the familiar comfort of escapements and balance wheels, things I understood, things that operated on logic and precision, but I knew I couldn't. Ignorance wasn't sanctuary, it was just a darker room in the same prison. I laid the small bundle carefully on the workbench, the blue ribbon a stark contrast against the oil-stained wood. I picked up the top envelope, turning it over. No return address. Postmarked nearly 6 months ago. 6 months. Not an old secret unearthed, then. Something recent, something ongoing. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold through me. I fanned the edges of the small stack. There were perhaps 5 or 6 letters in total, the dates likely progressing chronologically. The act of hiding them here, in my space, it felt like a deliberate violation, a taunt almost, or perhaps a desperate cry. Did she want them found? Was this some convoluted way of confessing something she couldn't speak aloud? My mind reeled, searching for explanations, for alternatives to the one stark, ugly possibility that loomed largest. I stared at the top envelope, at her familiar script forming that unfamiliar name. Michael. Who was he? What did he mean to her? What words had she poured onto these fragile pages, words she apparently couldn't share with me? Each question was a tiny hammer blow against the foundation of our life together. The grandfather clock stood silent witness, its pendulum still, its painted moon forever waning. It held time, yes, but it also held this secret, this potential shattering of everything I knew, my touch. It needed my touch, but opening these letters felt less like restoration and more like dismantling the most intricate, most precious clock of all, the one I had believed was my own marriage. My hand hovered over the flap of the envelope, the decision hanging heavier than any pendulum weight. With a deep, unsteady breath, I broke the seal. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age, though the ink was dark and clear. Barbara's handwriting filled the page, neat lines marching across the paper with a precision that seemed at odds with the clandestine nature of the letter itself. I didn't devour the words. I read them slowly, each sentence landing like a drop of ice water on my skin. It wasn't a passionate confession, not in the way I might have morbidly imagined. It was worse, somehow. It spoke of shared memories I wasn't part of, inside jokes I didn't understand, a comfortable intimacy that felt like a mirror image of my own relationship with her, distorted and wrong. She wrote about feelings of being unheard, of a quiet yearning for something more, not dramatically, not accusatorially towards me, but with a wistful longing that felt like a deeper betrayal than outright anger would have. She mentioned our talks, that afternoon by the lake, your understanding, phrases that painted pictures I couldn't see, referenced moments I hadn't known existed. She spoke of Michael's insights, his perspective, how he seemed to grasp parts of her that felt dormant. Dormant. The word coiled in my gut. Had parts of her been dormant with me? Had I failed to see, to hear, to understand the woman I slept beside every night? My image of Barbara flickered, the steady, pragmatic woman who managed our household finances with meticulous care, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries without fail, who could soothe any family squabble with quiet reason. That woman seemed to blur, replaced by someone restless, someone seeking solace or connection outside the life we had built. Had our comfortable rhythm become stifling for her? Had the predictability I cherished felt like a cage to her? I looked around my workshop, at the ordered rows of tools, the neatly labeled jars of screws and springs, the clocks waiting patiently for my attention. It was a world I controlled, a world that made sense. But the order felt fragile now, threatened by the chaos contained in these thin sheets of paper. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was accusatory. The grandfather clock seemed to loom larger, its face impassive, guarding its secrets, her secrets. I folded the single page carefully, my fingers tracing the crease, as if trying to smooth away the words themselves. The letter didn't speak of overt actions, not yet anyway, but the emotional infidelity was stark, laid bare in her elegant script. It was the intimacy of it, the shared vulnerability with another man that felt like a blade twisting slowly. One letter down. Several more remained in the small bundle, tied with that deceptively innocent blue ribbon. Did I need to read more? Didn't this first one tell me enough? A part of me screamed to stop, to burn them, to confront her with the single damning page. But another, colder part knew I had to see it through. I had to understand the scope of it, the timeline, the depth. Like dismantling a complex clockwork, I needed to see all the pieces before I could comprehend how broken it truly was. I reached for the next envelope, the ice in my veins spreading, freezing the hope I hadn't even realized I was still clinging to. The second letter was dated 3 weeks after the first. My hand was steadier this time, propelled by a grim determination. The paper rustled loudly in the stillness of the workshop. This one was different, shorter, more direct. It spoke of a meeting. "It was wonderful to see you again, Michael. truly, confirming my fear that this wasn't just an epistolary affair conducted from afar. They were meeting. Where? How often? She wrote about a conversation they'd had, something about her feeling invisible sometimes. Invisible. The word struck me like a physical blow. Had I made her feel invisible? I thought back over the years, the comfortable routines, the shared silences. Had I mistaken contentment for connection? Had I been so absorbed in my own world, my clocks, my predictable rhythms, that I'd failed to see the woman beside me drifting away? Self-doubt mingled with the rising tide of anger. It was a confusing, sickening mix. I wanted to rage, to smash something, to demand answers. But I also felt a profound, hollow sadness. If she felt invisible, why hadn't she told me? Why confide in Michael, this stranger, instead of the man who had vowed to cherish her 40 years ago? Was our connection so frayed that she couldn't even voice her unhappiness to me? I pictured her across the dinner table just last night, talking about Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses, her expression placid, her tone even. Was she thinking of Michael then? Was she comparing my quiet presence to his understanding? The normality of our daily lives suddenly felt like a carefully constructed play, and I was the unknowing fool on stage. The letter mentioned a book he had recommended, one she was now reading eagerly. It was a small detail, insignificant perhaps, but it stung. Sharing books had always been our thing. We'd trade paperbacks, discuss plot twists late into the night. Now she was sharing that with him, another piece of our shared life, quietly transferred to this other man. I placed the second letter atop the first, the small stack growing, each page adding weight to the crushing pressure in my chest. The workshop, my sanctuary, felt tainted. The precise tools seemed mocking, the silent clocks like judges. The grandfather clock, in particular, felt like the epicenter of this earthquake shaking my world. Its hidden compartment wasn't just wood and brass. It was a Pandora's box, and I was willingly lifting the lid, knowing only pain lay inside. My gaze fell upon a photograph tacked to the wall above my workbench. Barbara and I, 20 years younger, smiling on a beach, our children flanking us, small and sun-kissed. We looked happy, undeniably so. Had that happiness been real? Or was it just a snapshot, a fleeting moment before the shadows crept in? Before she started feeling invisible? Before Michael? The pain was morphing now, hardening into something sharp. The sadness remained, but it was undercut by a growing sense of betrayal that felt less like a wound and more like an insult. She hadn't just sought solace, she had actively deceived me. Meeting this man, hiding these letters, carrying on a secret emotional life while maintaining the facade of our marriage. I reached for the third letter. There was no turning back now. I needed the truth, the whole truth, no matter how much it cost. The blue ribbon lay discarded on the bench, a fragile remnant of an intimacy that wasn't mine. The third envelope felt heavier, or maybe it was just the weight in my own hand. This letter, dated about a month after the second, began differently. No preamble, just a stark recounting of an argument Barbara and I had apparently had the night before. An argument I barely remembered. It had been about something trivial, hadn't it? Whether to repair the old garden shed or tear it down, insignificant, forgotten almost as soon as it was over. But not to her. Reading her description of it, written for Michael's eyes, was like watching a distorted home movie. She portrayed my pragmatism as dismissal, my quiet nature as indifference. "Arthur just doesn't understand," she wrote. "He sees the shed, the wood, the nails. He doesn't see the memories attached, the summers the children played there. He doesn't listen." My breath hitched. Didn't listen? I always listened, or I thought I did. But maybe I listened for facts, for solutions, not for the unspoken emotions tangled beneath the surface. The shed wasn't just a shed to her, it was a symbol. And I, in my practical focus on rot and repair costs, had missed it entirely. And she had turned to him to voice this frustration, this feeling of being misunderstood. The letter continued, describing how talking to Michael afterward had been a relief, how he just got it without her having to explain. The comparison was blatant, painful. She was actively contrasting me with him, finding me lacking, and sharing that assessment with her confidant. The sense of being judged, weighed, and found wanting by my own wife through words intended for another man was profoundly humiliating. There was a shift in tone in this letter, too. A subtle warmth had crept in when she wrote about Michael, a familiarity that went beyond shared understanding. She mentioned his laugh, a kindness in his eyes. These weren't descriptions of a platonic confidant. They hinted at something deeper, an affection that was growing, budding in the secret space carved out by her perceived dissatisfaction with me. I put the letter down, feeling a wave of dizziness. The workshop air felt thick, heavy. I pushed myself off the stool and walked to the small window, looking out at the garden. The late afternoon light was fading, the shadows lengthening, swallowing the familiar shapes of rose bushes and the weathered bird bath. The garden shed stood at the far end, solid, unassuming. I saw it now not just as wood and nails, but as a symbol of my own potential failure, my inability to hear what wasn't explicitly said. But even as that wave of self-recrimination washed over me, a harder, colder anger surged underneath. She felt misunderstood, unheard. 40 years we'd had, 40 years of opportunities to talk, to argue, to thrash things out. Why choose clandestine meetings and hidden letters now? Why confide in a stranger rather than confront the issues within our marriage? It felt cowardly. It felt like a betrayal, not just of our vows, but of the basic respect two people who've built a life together should afford each other. The image of her humming softly upstairs, preparing dinner, returned. Was she up there now, thinking of Michael, planning their next meeting? The domestic tranquility I had always cherished now felt like a lie, a carefully staged performance. The grandfather clock stood sentinel, its silence no longer just the absence of ticking, but the quiet hum of deceit. 3 letters read, each one peeling back another layer, revealing a truth uglier than the last. I steeled myself and turned back to the workbench. There were still more secrets waiting in that small, ribbon-bound stack. The 4th letter, postmarked only a month ago, felt different the moment I picked it up. The paper was the same, thin and slightly brittle, but the handwriting seemed rushed, less controlled than her usual elegant script. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This letter wasn't about feelings of being misunderstood or gentle comparisons. It spoke directly of a shared experience, an afternoon that seemed to shimmer with significance in her words. She didn't detail precisely what had happened, her language frustratingly vague, yet emotionally loaded. She used phrases like magic, a connection I haven't felt in years, and feeling truly seen, that word again, by him, not by me. She wrote about guilt, a flicker of it that seemed quickly suppressed. I know I shouldn't feel this way, Michael, one line read, but I can't help it. Being with you felt right. Being with you. The ambiguity was agonizing. Did she mean simply being in his presence, talking, or something more? The context, the rushed handwriting, the sheer emotional weight imbued in the vague description, it all screamed of a line being crossed. The ache in my chest intensified, radiating outwards, making my arms feel heavy, useless. This wasn't just emotional infidelity anymore, was it? The careful ambiguity felt like a thin veil over something physical. The afternoon they shared wasn't just tea and sympathy. It was the point where shared understanding tipped into shared intimacy, the exact nature of which I could only sickeningly imagine. I felt nauseous. The smell of lemon oil and old wood suddenly turned rancid in my nostrils. I gripped the edge of the workbench, knuckles white, trying to anchor myself as the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. 40 years. Had it meant so little? Was our life together, our history, our family, so easily discardable for an afternoon of feeling seen by someone else? The careful logic I applied to clock repair offered no solace here. There were no gears to adjust, no springs to tighten. This was human fallibility, human betrayal, messy and illogical and devastating. The clock in the corner seemed to watch me, its face a mask of indifference. It had guarded her secret, housed the evidence of my life unraveling. Barbara had brought this Trojan horse into my sanctuary. I thought of her laughter, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. I thought of her hand resting lightly on my arm during walks, her head on my shoulder during quiet evenings, watching television. Which parts were real? Which parts were performance? Had she come home from that magical afternoon with Michael and sat across from me at dinner, making small talk, her mind still replaying moments I wasn't allowed to know? The thought was unbearable. My anger was a cold fire now, burning away the sadness, leaving behind a brittle, sharp residue. The self-doubt hadn't vanished entirely, but it was overshadowed by the stark reality of her choices. She hadn't just felt unheard, she had actively sought connection elsewhere, cultivated it, hidden it, and likely consummated it. I looked at the remaining 1 or 2 envelopes still tied loosely by the blue ribbon. Did the final letter hold the confession, the explanation, or just more carefully coded descriptions of stolen moments? I almost didn't want to know. But I had come this far. I had to see the end of it. With a hand that shook not from age, but from rage and heartbreak, I reached for the next letter, the penultimate nail in the coffin of my marriage. The 5th letter was postmarked just last week. The proximity felt like a fresh wound. My fingers fumbled with the envelope flap, a stark contrast to the precision I usually employed in my work. The single sheet inside felt heavier than all the others combined. Barbara's handwriting was tight, controlled again, but different, colder. This letter wasn't about yearning or feeling unseen. It was practical. It spoke of logistics, of plans. It mentioned the arrangement and how Michael had been so generous. Generous? What arrangement? My mind immediately flashed to the clock. Barbara had mentioned getting a surprisingly good deal on it at the estate sale. Had Michael arranged it? Had he paid for it? The idea that this symbol of her betrayal, this vessel holding her secret letters, might have been financed by her lover, sent a sickening jolt through me. Then came the line that stopped my breath. Once things are settled with Arthur, we can finally start planning properly. It feels like the right time, Michael. A new beginning. Settled with Arthur. That was me. A problem to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome before she could move on to her new beginning with him. I wasn't a husband, a partner of 40 years. I was an inconvenience, a loose end to be tied up. The coldness of it, the calculated planning for my disposal, was more devastating than any passionate confession could have been. There it was, the confirmation, not just an emotional affair, not just a physical lapse, but a plan to leave me, to dismantle our life together, orchestrated with the man she'd been seeing behind my back. And the clock. Bringing the clock here, hiding the letters inside it. It felt calculated now. Was it a backup plan? A way to ensure the letters were found if something went wrong? Or worse, a cruel, deliberate message planted in my own sanctuary? Did she want me to find them? To make the break easier for her? I dropped the letter onto the workbench as if it had burned my fingers. The neat stack scattered slightly, exposing fragments of her handwriting, fragments of my shattered life. The room seemed to spin. I saw flashes, Barbara laughing at our wedding, holding our first child, sleeping peacefully beside me just this morning. How could that woman write these words? How could she plan the demolition of our life with such cold precision? The grandfather clock stood silently in the corner, its beautiful facade, the rich walnut, the intricate dial. It all seemed like a mockery now. It wasn't just a timepiece, it was a monument to her deceit, delivered into my hands, into my workshop. "It needs your touch," she'd said. Oh, it needed touching, all right. I felt a sudden violent urge to take a hammer to it, to splinter the polished wood, shatter the glass, silence its smug ticking forever. Except it wasn't even ticking. It was just standing there, a hollow testament. My grief had curdled into something else entirely, a hard, unyielding anger, yes, but beneath it, a strange sense of calm began to settle. The worst was known. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by the brutal clarity of her intentions. She wasn't just unhappy, she was actively planning her exit, using another man's generosity to facilitate it, reducing me to an item on a checklist, settle things with Arthur. There was one more envelope, thin, tucked beneath the others, almost overlooked. Did it matter what it said? I knew the core truth now, yet, like a surgeon needing to see the full extent of the damage, I reached for it. The final piece, the last secret the clock had held for her. My hand closed around it, the paper cool against my skin, the silence of the workshop pressing in, waiting for the final revelation. The last envelope was thinner than the others, almost flat. It wasn't addressed, wasn't postmarked. It had simply been tucked amongst the rest, tied within the blue ribbon's embrace. My movements were mechanical now as I slid my finger under the flap. No resistance. It wasn't sealed. The inside wasn't a letter penned in Barbara's hand. It was a simple folded piece of heavy cardstock. I unfolded it slowly. It was a receipt. A gift receipt, specifically, from the antique dealer who ran the estate sale Barbara had attended. Dated the day before yesterday. The item described was unmistakable. One walnut grandfather clock, C18 moon phase dial. The price listed made my breath catch. It was significantly higher then the good deal Barbara had mentioned, well beyond what we'd normally spend on a whim, and then my eyes snagged on the final lines at the bottom. Purchaser, Michael Sterling. Below that, recipient, Barbara Carter, delivery address, 457 Willow Creek Drive, Oak Haven, IL 60305. Michael Sterling. So he had a last name after all. And he hadn't just facilitated the purchase. He had bought the clock for her. It was a gift. A large, expensive, symbolic gift delivered directly to our home. The home she planned to leave. He had paid for the very object she used to hide her secret correspondence, the proof of her plan to build a new life with him. The audacity of it was breathtaking, the sheer calculated cruelty. This wasn't just betrayal, it was psychological warfare, waged subtly, right under my nose, within the walls of my own home, using the objects of my own passion as weapons. The generosity she'd mentioned in her letter wasn't just about emotional support, it was tangible, financial. He was bankrolling the transition, starting with this clock. I let the receipt drift from my fingers onto the pile of letters. It landed face up, Michael Sterling's name stark against the white cardstock. All the pieces clicked into place with sickening precision, like the final tumblers of a lock, falling open to reveal an empty vault where treasure should have been. I leaned back on the stool, the scattered letters and the damning receipt laid out before me on the workbench like exhibits in a trial I hadn't known I was attending. The anger didn't flare. It settled deep, cold and hard as steel in my sight. The image of Barbara humming upstairs, the memory of her bright eyes as she presented the clock, it all replayed with a chilling new soundtrack. Every word, every gesture felt retroactively poisoned. The grandfather clock stood in the corner, magnificent and silent. It was his gift to her, a symbol of their future, placed deliberately in my present. It needed my touch, she'd said. Perhaps it did, but not in the way she intended. My mind was surprisingly clear. The shock had passed. The grief was momentarily numb, replaced by an absolute chilling certainty. This could not stand. The life I had known was over, dismantled piece by the words on these pages and the name on that receipt. The question wasn't if things would change, but how. I looked at the letters, at the clock, at the tools hanging neatly on my wall, my touch, yes, it was time for my touch. The silence in the workshop stretched, heavy with unspoken decisions, the scent of lemon oil and betrayal thick in the air as I considered my first move.